The dusty town of Copper Ridge stood like a forgotten relic of a time long past. It was late afternoon when Nancy Hartley arrived, stepping off the stagecoach with a worn carpetbag in hand and a heart heavy with both fear and hope. The sun cast long shadows across the cracked streets, and the few buildings that remained were weathered and neglected. Copper Ridge wasn't much, just a handful of homes, a saloon, and the general store. Nothing about it promised a future. But for Nancy, it was a place to hide, a place to disappear. Her eyes scanned the street, absorbing everything but feeling nothing. At 25, Nancy had seen enough of the world to know that running was sometimes the only option. A week ago, she hadn't even known this town existed. A week ago, she'd been a different woman, carrying the weight of a past she couldn't outrun. The contract in her hand crinkled as she gripped it tightly. It was her ticket, her escape. She'd signed it without question, a promise from a man she had never met. Ryan Mercer, a rancher who needed a wife. The details didn't matter. The deal was simple. He needed help, and she needed safety. Nancy had no illusions about the arrangement. It was business, nothing more. She had a purpose here, and that purpose didn't include questions about the man waiting for her. But as she made her way down the street toward the livery, the weight of her decision began to settle in. Would she be able to trust him? Or was she just trading one set of chains for another? Ryan Mercer stood by his wagon, watching her approach. He was taller than she had expected, his face weathered and etched with years of hard work. His eyes were a sharp blue, cold and calculating. Yet there was something beneath them, something that caught her attention in a way she couldn't quite explain. His clothes, though worn, were of good quality, his boots polished, and there was a quiet intensity about him that made Nancy uneasy. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice low but polite. He tipped his hat as she reached him. "You made it." Nancy nodded, offering a small, tight smile. "I did," she said simply. The awkwardness between them was palpable, but she had no choice but to face it. This wasn't supposed to be a fairy tale. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. Ryan gestured toward the wagon. "I've got a seat for you here. We've got a little ways to go to the ranch." Nancy glanced at the town one last time before climbing into the wagon. It was just as she had imagined, a place far from her past, but a place that didn't promise much in the future either. As they rode in silence, the only sounds were the creaking of the wagon wheels and the faint rustle of the dry wind. The land around them seemed to stretch forever, barren and empty. The hills were a dull brown, dotted with the occasional scattered shrub. There was no sign of life, no evidence that this land had ever been anything more than a wasteland. Ryan didn't speak at first, as though he were giving her space. Nancy wanted to ask questions to understand why she was here, why he had asked for a mail-order bride. But she held her tongue. She didn't need answers right now. She needed to make sure she kept her distance and did what was required of her. After a long silence, Ryan finally broke it. "We'll marry tomorrow morning," he said, his voice businesslike. No sense in waiting. Nancy's heart skipped a beat. It was sudden, unexpected, but not surprising. A marriage of convenience. That was all this was. She knew that. "Tomorrow," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She wanted to ask about the ranch, about the land, but the words didn't come. There was something about the way Ryan spoke, about the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, that made her hesitant. She was already out of her depth, already tied to a man whose past she didn't know and whose intentions she couldn't trust. The wagon rattled along the narrow path, the distance between them growing with every mile. As they neared the ranch, Nancy's eyes flickered toward the horizon. The land here was vast, endless almost, but it was dry, unused and barren. There were no crops, no animals. It was as if the land had given up long ago. And yet, there was a house, small but well kept, with a barn beside it. The place was quiet, as though it had been waiting for something or someone to bring it back to life. Ryan stopped the wagon outside the house. He didn't get out right away. as though he were giving Nancy a moment to take it all in. She climbed down slowly, her feet sinking into the dirt as she looked around. The place wasn't much, but it was something. For a moment, she almost felt the weight of the past lifting off her shoulders, replaced by the pressure of this new life. A life she wasn't sure she was ready for. Ryan stepped around to stand beside her. "This is it," he said simply. "It's not much, but it's ours." Nancy nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was truly theirs or just his. The land seemed to stretch before her, endless and empty. But in that emptiness, she saw something else, a chance. A chance to rebuild, a chance to start over. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she might just be able to find something worth fighting for. As she followed Ryan inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a fresh start. There was something else waiting for her here. Something beneath this surface, hidden in the earth, waiting to be uncovered. The first week at the ranch passed in a strange, uneasy rhythm. Nancy fell into a routine, waking before dawn to prepare breakfast for Ryan, who, by the time she finished, was already out the door, his boots kicking up dust as he headed toward the farthest reaches of the property. His routine was predictable, yet silent. Each day, he worked from sunup to sundown, disappearing for hours at a time, never speaking of his work, never offering any explanation. Nancy tried to settle into her new role, cooking and cleaning, making the house as comfortable as she could, though it wasn't much. The walls were thin, the furniture sparse, and there was no warmth beyond the fire in the hearth. As she worked, she kept to herself, wondering about the man she had married, wondering about the life she had agreed to live. Ryan never spoke of his past, never explained why he needed a wife. His words were always kind, but distant, as though the marriage was a matter of convenience, not something he had ever desired. And that cold distance weighed heavily on Nancy. He would return each evening, always polite but distracted, and always with no more than a passing remark about her day. It was clear that the arrangement between them was business, nothing more, and yet, with each passing day, Nancy felt herself drawn into something deeper, a place she didn't want to be, but couldn't seem to escape. His silence gnawed at her, making her question every word he had said when they first met. By the second day, she noticed something else, the barn. There was a locked door at the back, one that Ryan had warned her to stay away from. At night, strange sounds drifted up from beneath the house, metallic, rhythmic, like the sound of something being dug, something being unearthed. It didn't make sense. Every time she asked Ryan about the sounds, he would brush it off, saying it was nothing to worry about. But the unease in his voice, the way his eyes darted away from her, told a different story. It wasn't until the fourth day that she decided to act. With Ryan gone, as he always was, Nancy found herself standing outside the locked barn door. She had no intention of making trouble, no intention of snooping, but something about that door, about the secret it seemed to hold, pulled at her. Using a hairpin, a skill she had learned long ago when life had forced her to be resourceful, she picked the lock. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside, the dim light from the cracks in the barn walls casting long shadows. What she found was not what she had expected. The barn was nearly empty, but there were several large crates, their contents hidden under blankets. She pulled one out carefully, revealing maps, detailed, well-drawn property maps with lines marking underground tunnels and shafts that seemed to extend beneath the ranch. There were also documents, assay reports, geological surveys, and letters from a mining company offering to buy the property. The numbers on the papers were staggering. One report claimed that a silver vein ran beneath the land, worth over $50,000. Her heart skipped a beat. Ryan had never mentioned anything about silver, but here it was in black and white, proof of something far greater than a simple ranch. As she scanned the documents, Nancy's mind raced. It was all so clear now. Ryan hadn't married her because he wanted a wife. He had married her to cover something, to hide the truth about what lay beneath the land he had called his own. But why? Why hide something so valuable? And why involve her in it? As she was trying to make sense of the discovery, a distant sound reached her ears, wagon wheels crunching over gravel. Ryan was returning earlier than usual. Panic flooded her. She quickly shoved the documents back into the crates and closed the door, locking it again before running back to the house. She hadn't expected to find anything so startling. She hadn't known what she was looking for. But now that she had found something, she couldn't unsee it. She had to know the truth. As Ryan pulled into the yard and stepped down from his wagon, his eyes found hers. He studied her, and she could feel the tension building between them. He said nothing about the barn, nothing about what she had uncovered, but she knew, deep down, that he had seen the change in her eyes. He knew she was no longer as docile, as naive, as she had been when she arrived. That evening, after dinner, Nancy decided to confront him. As they sat in the quiet of the house, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, she spoke. "I found something today," she said, her voice steady but her heart pounding. Ryan's face remained unreadable, but she could see the slight twitch of his jaw, the way his hands tightened around his glass. "I found papers, maps, letters about the silver beneath this land." His eyes darkened, and for the first time since they had met, there was a flicker of something deeper in his gaze. He looked at her long and hard, his voice low. "It's not what you think," he said, his words slow, measured. "You don't need to worry about it." "I'm not worried," she replied, her voice cold. "I just want to understand. Why did you bring me here, Ryan? Why marry me?" His face hardened, and he stood up abruptly, pacing the floor. "You were part of the arrangement, Nancy," he said, his voice sharp. "You needed a place to hide, and I needed someone to make this ranch look legitimate. That's all this was." Nancy's chest tightened, her throat dry. She knew the truth now. She wasn't here for love. She was here as a cover, a way to disguise the real reason Ryan had brought her to this godforsaken place. "I deserve to know more than that," she said, standing up to face him. Ryan's eyes flickered with something, a flash of guilt, or was it anger? "You don't know what it's like," he snapped. "You don't know what it means to survive out here. You don't understand what's at stake." Nancy stepped closer, her voice firm. "I'm your wife, Ryan. I deserve the truth." The room grew heavy with silence, and for a moment, it seemed as though Ryan might speak, might tell her everything. But instead, he turned away, his back to her. "We'll talk about it later," he said, his voice flat. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a long day." But Nancy knew. She knew there were secrets buried deep in this land, secrets he wasn't ready to share. And the more she uncovered, the less she was sure she wanted to know. The following morning, Nancy woke early, her mind restless and troubled by the discovery she had made in the barn. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a house of lies, a place built on secrets and deceit. As Ryan left for his usual day of work, disappearing into the dry, barren land, Nancy found herself unable to stay still. She had to know more. The locked door in the barn gnawed at her, and despite the warning Ryan had given her, she knew she had no choice but to investigate further. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the barn, each step echoing in the empty silence of the ranch. The wind howled through the dry grasses, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. She had to know what Ryan was hiding, and she had to know why he had brought her here. Taking a deep breath, Nancy stood before the barn door, her hand resting on the cold, rusty lock. The hairpin she had used before was still tucked into her sleeve, and with it, she carefully picked the lock. It clicked open with a satisfying sound, and she pushed the door open slowly, her heart racing in her chest. Inside, everything seemed the same as it had before, but now, knowing what she did, the barn felt different. The air was thick with the smell of dust and earth, and the light filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls cast long, eerie shadows. She moved quickly to the crates she had uncovered the day before, her hands trembling as she lifted the blankets from them. The papers inside were just as she had left them, though now they seemed more significant, more dangerous. As she began to sort through the documents, her eyes widened in disbelief. There were assay reports confirming that the silver beneath the land was not just a rumor, but a fact. High-grade silver were worth over $50,000. The letters from the mining company were there, too, offering a sizable sum to buy the property. But what struck her the most were the journal entries Ryan had written, the words almost haunting in their simplicity. For more months. Then we'll have fortune enough. She can never know. Word spreads, claim jumpers come. Married her for cover. Broke rancher draws less suspicion. Nancy's stomach twisted as she read the words. It was clear now. Ryan hadn't married her for love. She wasn't his partner. She was his alibi. His disguise. Her mind raced as the weight of the truth settled over her. She wasn't here because he needed a wife. She was here because she made him appear like a man struggling to survive, a man who didn't have the resources to stake a legitimate claim. She had been nothing more than a pawn in his game, a cover to hide the real reason he was on this land. The betrayal hit her hard. She had come to this place thinking that maybe, just maybe, she could start over. But instead, she had walked into a carefully constructed lie. She was just a means to an end, nothing more. As she stood there, holding the papers in her hands, she heard the unmistakable sound of a wagon returning. Ryan was coming back earlier than usual. Panic surged through her. She quickly shoved the documents back into their crates and closed the door, locking it once more. She didn't know what she was going to do with the knowledge she had just gained, but she knew one thing. She couldn't confront him yet. Not like this. Not until she understood more about what he was hiding. As she returned to the house, her mind raced with questions. How long had Ryan known about the silver? Had he been planning this for years? Why had he married her so quickly? Was he using her as a shield, a distraction from the real treasure he was hiding? But above all, she wanted to know one thing. Why had he let her get close to him? Why had he let her believe, even for a moment, that they could have something real? By the time Ryan arrived, Nancy had composed herself. She greeted him with the usual smile, hiding the turmoil bubbling inside. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't comment on it. They exchanged pleasantries over dinner, and as always, Ryan was polite but distant. She couldn't help but wonder if he ever felt anything other than businesslike when it came to her. She wanted to ask him about the silver, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. She was trapped, caught between the need to confront him and the fear of what might happen if she did. That evening, after dinner, she decided to push him. She had to know the truth. She had to understand what kind of man he really was. As they sat in the living room, the fire crackling softly, Nancy finally spoke. "I went back to the barn today," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Ryan's eyes flickered toward her, but he didn't say anything. "I found the papers, the maps, the reports. I know about the silver now, Ryan." His face didn't change, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I knew you would eventually," he said quietly. "You've always been clever." Nancy's eyes narrowed. "So, you were just going to keep it from me? You were going to use me as a cover, all this time, without telling me the truth?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. "This land," he began slowly, his voice almost a whisper, "it's all I have left. My father lost it to the mine collapse years ago. I've been trying to get it back ever since. But if people knew what was beneath it, they'd come after it. They'd try to take it from me. I needed you, Nancy. I needed someone to make me look like a normal rancher, someone who wasn't sitting on fortune." Nancy's heart sank. She wasn't just his wife. She was a tool, a way to hide his secret. "I married you because I needed help," he continued, his back still to her. I didn't think I'd care about you." The words stung, but she didn't let him see her hurt. "And when the silver runs out, Ryan, what happens then? Do you just send me away?" The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Ryan turned to face her, his eyes softer now. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." But Nancy knew. She wasn't part of his future. She had never been more than a cover. "I deserve more than that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Ryan didn't respond, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. The truth was out now, and everything had changed. The days following Nancy's discovery in the barn were tense, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The silence between her and Ryan grew heavier, filled with unsaid words and unresolved tension. Ryan worked even longer hours, barely returning to the house except to eat before disappearing again into the vast, empty landscape. Nancy tried to focus on her chores, but the secret of the silver weighed on her mind, gnawing at her every thought. She had known Ryan wasn't entirely honest with her, but she hadn't realized the extent of his deceit. She had assumed they were both running from their pasts, but it seemed his secret was bigger than hers. That night, just as Nancy was about to retire for the evening, she heard the sound of hooves thundering in the distance. The unmistakable rhythm of multiple riders made her heart race. She went to the window, peering through the curtain to see 3 riders approaching the ranch at a quick pace. Their figures loomed larger as they neared the house, their silhouettes outlined against the fading light of the setting sun. The lead rider, a man with a broad-brimmed hat, looked every bit the part of a seasoned rancher, but the cruel twist of his smile told Nancy that he wasn't here for anything as simple as a friendly visit. Her pulse quickened. She didn't need to ask who they were. Ryan, who had been in the barn, came rushing to the house, his face hard and tense. He didn't have to say anything. Nancy knew the trouble had arrived. The men reined in their horses sharply, and the leader dismounted with a calm, almost arrogant manner. "Mercer," the man said, his voice sharp as he locked eyes with Ryan. "We've been hearing some interesting things about your land." The man's gaze flickered over Nancy, and she instinctively stepped back. She knew that look, the one that appraised a person like they were no more than a tool or obstacle. "I'm Lewis Brennan," the man continued, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And this is Wade and Tom." He gestured to the 2 men who flanked him. "We've been hearing rumors about some good things going on here." Nancy's stomach churned. She had no idea what was happening, but the way Ryan's jaw clenched told her this was no friendly visit. Ryan stiffened but kept his tone calm. "Nothing's going on here," he said evenly, trying to keep the situation under control. "Just a man trying to make a living." Brennan raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Funny," he said with a slow grin, "because I've heard rumors of silver beneath your land. Quite a rich vein, if I'm not mistaken." Nancy could see Ryan's fists tighten at his sides, the veins in his neck straining as if he were holding back a storm. "You've been misinformed," Ryan replied, his voice low and steady, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "Something dangerous. This land's been dry for years. Ain't much here but dust and bad luck." But Brennan wasn't buying it. He took a step forward, his boots crunching on the dry ground, and his smile widened. "We're here to make you an offer, Mercer. We could make it worth your while to sell." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "I'm not selling." The conversation was terse, laced with an undercurrent of danger that sent a chill down Nancy's spine. She glanced out the corner of her eye at the other 2 men, who were scanning the property, their eyes sharp, looking for anything that could be of value. Brennan seemed to sense the rising tension and took a step back, but his grin remained. "That's unfortunate," he said, "because if you're not willing to deal, we might have to find another way to make you change your mind." The words hung in the air, thick with a threat that was impossible to ignore. Ryan's face darkened, and Nancy could feel the tension in his body, like a tightrope about to snap. The 3 men mounted their horses again, ready to leave, but before they did, Brennan gave Ryan a pointed look. "We'll be keeping an eye on this place, Mercer," he said, his voice cold. "Don't think we won't be back." With that, the riders turned and galloped off into the fading light, leaving the air heavy with the promise of more trouble to come. Nancy stood there in the silence that followed, her heart pounding in her chest. Ryan didn't move for several moments, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the riders had disappeared. Finally, he let out a long breath, as if releasing a tension that had been building for far too long. "They're after the mine," he said quietly, his voice strained. Nancy looked at him, her heart sinking. "What do they want with the land?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "They want the silver. They think they can take it, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it." Nancy felt a wave of dread wash over her. She hadn't understood the full danger of the situation until now. She wasn't just running from her past. She was living in the midst of a dangerous secret, one that could cost them both everything. But what could they do? How could they protect themselves from men like Brennan and his crew? Ryan turned away, walking toward the house. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he said, almost to himself. "But I know one thing. We can't let them have it." The cold reality of their situation settled over Nancy like a dark cloud. She had no idea how they would fight back, or if they even could. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just about surviving her past. Now, it was about fighting for the future she had thought she was building with Ryan. The stakes had never been higher, and the danger was closing in fast. In the days that followed the arrival of Lewis Brennan and his men, the atmosphere at the ranch became even more tense. Nancy could feel the shift in Ryan. He was more on edge than ever, his movements sharper, more deliberate, as if he were preparing for something inevitable. He worked the land tirelessly, his face set in grim determination, and Nancy, though uneasy, found herself drawn into the whirlwind of activity. She was no stranger to hard work, but the intensity of their new reality made every task feel more urgent, more necessary. Every moment felt like they were racing against time, against the growing threat looming over them. Nancy had always been resourceful, and she quickly adapted to life on the ranch, helping Ryan with the mining operations. The work was grueling, the hours long, and the dangers they faced more than just physical. It was as though every choice they made had to be measured with extreme caution. Ryan never spoke much about the men who had visited, but Nancy knew the situation was growing dire. As they worked side by side, she noticed how often Ryan would glance over his shoulder, checking the horizon, as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. His nerves were rubbing off on her, and the more she saw of him, the more she realized just how much was riding on the silver beneath the land. One evening, as the two of them were working in the mine, Nancy noticed Ryan's hands shaking slightly as he handled the tools. She had never seen him like this before, always composed, always in control, but now the cracks were beginning to show. She approached him, her voice soft but firm. "You can't keep going like this," she said. Ryan stopped, wiping the sweat from his brow, his expression tight. "I don't have a choice," he replied, his voice low. "This is the only chance I've got. If we don't make it work now, everything will be lost. The mine, this land, it's all I've got left." Nancy could see the desperation in his eyes, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. She had known there was more to Ryan than the quiet, determined rancher she had married. But this was a side of him she hadn't fully understood. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to reclaim something that had been lost long ago, something that mattered to him more than anything else. "We're in this together," she said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. "Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side." Ryan looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, she saw a flicker of something resembling relief in his eyes. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the hard resolve that had driven him from the beginning. "We don't have time for any distractions, Nancy," he said, pulling away from her. "We need to finish this and get it done. I can't afford to fail." Nancy understood, but the words stung nonetheless. She wasn't a distraction. She wasn't a bystander. She was his partner, whether he wanted to admit it or not. The pressure was beginning to wear on her too, though, and every night, as the moon rose over the barren hills, she found herself lying awake, listening to the sounds of the land, the creaking of the house, the low hum of the earth beneath her. She could hear it now, louder than before, the rhythmic, metallic thrum from deep beneath the earth. It was almost as though the land itself was alive, and it was beckoning them to uncover its secrets. Yet, as Nancy lay there in the dark, the feeling of danger grew stronger with every passing day. The threats from Brennan's men were not idle. She had seen the way they had looked at the land, at the silver hidden beneath it, and she knew that their intentions were anything but honorable. It wasn't just about mining. It wasn't just about money. There was something else at play here, something far more dangerous. Nancy's fears were confirmed when, just days after Brennan's visit, Ryan received a letter. It was from the mining company, but this time it wasn't a polite offer to buy the land. It was a thinly veiled threat, warning Ryan that if he didn't sell within the week, there would be consequences. "They'll come for it," Ryan said, his face grim as he handed the letter to Nancy. "They won't stop until they get it." She read the letter carefully, the words burning into her mind. It was clear they weren't just offering to buy the land. They were demanding it. The implication was obvious. If Ryan didn't comply, they would take it by force. The weight of the threat settled heavily on Nancy's shoulders. It wasn't just a matter of protecting their claim anymore. It was about their survival. They couldn't let these men take the mine from them. They couldn't let their hard work, their sacrifices, be for nothing. But what could they do? They had no power, no resources to fight back. They were two people against a powerful company and the ruthless men who worked for it. That night, after dinner, as they sat together in the quiet of the house, Nancy could see the toll the growing pressure was taking on Ryan. He was distant again, his mind far away, calculating, planning, as though trying to find some way out of the impossible situation they found themselves in. She hated to see him like this, as though the weight of everything was crushing him from the inside out. "Ryan," she said, her voice gentle, "we'll figure this out. We have to. We're not alone. We have each other." He looked at her then, his eyes dark with a mixture of exhaustion and desperation. "I don't know if we can win this, Nancy," he admitted, his voice tight. "But I'll be damned if I go down without a fight." Nancy's heart clenched. She understood now. This wasn't just about silver. It was about proving something. Proving that he could overcome the past, that he could reclaim what had been taken from him. And maybe, just maybe, it was about more than just survival. It was about finding a future worth fighting for. As they prepared for what was coming, Nancy realized something. They were no longer just surviving. They were starting to fight back together. The threat was real, and the danger was closing in. But no matter what happened, she would stand by his side. They would face whatever came next together. The tension that had been building steadily over the past few weeks finally came to a head when the sound of galloping hooves broke the quiet of the ranch one evening. Nancy had just finished preparing dinner when the unmistakable clatter of approaching riders reached her ears. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly looked out the window, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the riders nearing the ranch. 3 of them. She recognized them immediately. Lewis Brennan, Way Brennan, and Tom, the same men who had threatened them days ago. Nancy's stomach twisted into knots. They were back, and this time, they weren't here for a casual conversation. She rushed to the door, her eyes searching for Ryan, but he was already at the front of the house, standing tall with his arms crossed, his jaw set in grim determination. Ryan's face was hard, the mask of calm he wore barely hiding the anger beneath it. He had known this day was coming, just as much as she had, but now that it was here, Nancy could feel the weight of it. These men weren't just after the silver. They were after control, after forcing Ryan into submission. She could see it in the way Brennan's eyes glinted with malicious intent. They weren't leaving until they got what they wanted. The riders dismounted with deliberate slowness, their boots crunching on the dirt as they made their way toward Ryan. Nancy stood in the doorway, watching, waiting for the inevitable clash. She could feel the tension hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. "Mercer," Brennan called out, his voice smooth and condescending. "We've come to settle things. You've had enough time to think it over. We'll take the mine now." Ryan didn't flinch, didn't give an inch. "You've got no right to it," he said, his voice cold and steady. "It's mine." Brennan chuckled darkly, taking a few steps closer. "Oh, it's yours, is it? You've been hiding that silver from everyone, Mercer. But the truth is, we've been patient long enough. The time for negotiations is over." Ryan's face hardened as Brennan spoke, but his voice remained even. "I'm not selling. Not to you. Not to anyone. You can leave, or you can stay. But nothing changes." Brennan's smile faded, and he stepped closer to Ryan, his tone turning more dangerous. "I was hoping you'd see reason, but if you want to do this the hard way, so be it. We have a sheriff on our side now. You think you're going to stop us? You think you'll just keep digging that silver out of the ground and pretend no one notices?" Ryan's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Nancy thought he might give in. But then, he took a deep breath, his expression hardening into something that made her heart race with fear and admiration. "If you think you can scare me off with threats, you're wrong," Ryan said, his voice low and steady. "I won't let you take what's mine. This land is mine, and I'll fight for it. All of it." There was a long pause, a moment where everything seemed to hang in the balance. Brennan and Ryan stared each other down, the intensity of their gaze sharp enough to cut through the air. Then, without warning, Brennan reached into his jacket, pulling out a piece of paper and holding it out in front of Ryan. "You've got one last chance, Mercer," he said, his voice cold. "Sign this, and we'll take the silver and leave you with your land. Refuse, and we'll take everything. Your land, your mind, your life." Ryan didn't even glance at the paper. His eyes were locked on Brennan's, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't get to make the rules," Ryan said firmly. "I'll never sign it." Brennan's smile faded completely, replaced by a dark scowl. "Then you've made your choice," he said, his voice full of venom. "But know this, Mercer. We'll get that silver, and we'll take it from you, whether you like it or not." Nancy felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to let it show. She stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed Brennan. "You're not going to get away with this," she said, her tone hard. "You can't just bully your way in here and take what doesn't belong to you." Brennan's gaze shifted to her, a mocking smile curling on his lips. "And what's this?" The little woman speaking up. He laughed, a cruel sound that made Nancy's blood boil. "Stay out of this, sweetheart. This isn't your fight." But Nancy wasn't about to back down. "It is my fight," she said, her voice sharp. "You don't get to threaten us, or our future, just because you think you can. You'll have to go through both of us if you want this land." Brennan's face twisted into an ugly sneer, and for a moment, it seemed like the tension would snap. But then, the sound of approaching hooves reached their ears, and Nancy's heart skipped a beat. She looked toward the horizon and saw a figure riding toward them, someone familiar. The sheriff, with his deputies. Brennan's face darkened as he turned to face the new threat. "What is this?" he growled, clearly frustrated. The sheriff rode up, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "What's going on here, Mercer?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "These men are trespassing," Ryan said, his voice calm but firm. "They've been threatening me, and now they want to take my land." The sheriff looked at Brennan, then back at Ryan. "I told you to stay out of trouble, Mercer," he said, his tone low. "But this is a different matter." Brennan stepped forward, trying to assert control. "This land's ours, Sheriff. We have a claim." The sheriff raised his hand, silencing him. "On whose authority?" he asked, his voice low. Brennan faltered. We've got the law on our side." The sheriff scoffed. "Not here you don't." He turned to his deputies. "Get these men off Mercer's land." The deputies moved in quickly, and Brennan's men, realizing the situation had turned against them, began to back down. Brennan, seething with anger, glared at Ryan one last time before he turned and mounted his horse. "This isn't over, Mercer," he spat, his voice low. "We'll be back." As Brennan and his men rode off, Ryan exhaled, his body relaxing for the first time in days. Nancy felt the weight lift off her shoulders, but the threat still hung in the air. They had won this round, but the battle was far from over. She turned to Ryan, who was still standing tall, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had fought for his land, for his future, and for the first time since their marriage, Nancy felt the true weight of what they were facing and what they would need to do to survive. The air felt different the morning after the confrontation, as though the earth itself had exhaled, and with it, the tension that had hung thick in the air for so long. The sheriff had come through when it counted, and though the threat of Brennan and his men had been temporarily pushed back, Nancy knew it wasn't the end. It couldn't be. As the sun rose over the ranch, casting long shadows across the land, the silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken words, unprocessed emotions, and the knowledge that their fight was far from over. Ryan had been quiet all morning, his eyes distant, his face set in that familiar, stubborn expression. He was still processing everything. The threat, the intervention, the feeling that their peace was now a fragile thing, easily shattered by the next wave of danger. Nancy, too, couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at her gut. The danger wasn't gone. They had managed to fend off Brennan's men for now. But what if they came back with more force? What if they weren't so easily deterred next time? As she moved through her morning chores, her thoughts kept returning to the land itself, the silver beneath it, the power it held to change everything. It was a hidden truth that had brought her here, a truth that had caused Ryan to turn his life upside down. But it was also a truth that had placed them all in jeopardy. The stakes had grown higher, the game more dangerous. By the time Ryan returned to the house after his rounds, Nancy had already made up her mind. They couldn't wait for another confrontation. They couldn't hide behind the idea that they could simply keep going day by day, pretending that everything would eventually work out. They had to act. "Ryan," she said, her voice steady as she met him in the kitchen, "we need to secure the mine. We need to make it legal." Ryan looked up from the table, his brow furrowed, confusion flashing across his face. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. Nancy took a breath, gathering her thoughts. "We can't keep pretending that this land is just a ranch. We can't keep hiding the truth. It's time to make the silver ours, to stake our claim legally. If we don't, someone else will come for it. It's only a matter of time." Ryan's eyes darkened as he considered her words. It was clear he understood the gravity of the situation, but there was something else in his eyes, something that spoke to the fear and exhaustion he'd been carrying for so long. "You don't think I know that?" he asked, his voice tight. "You don't think I know that every day we're out here, we're just waiting for someone else to come and take it from us?" Nancy stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She placed a hand on his arm, her fingers trembling slightly. "Then let's make it official. Let's file the proper claims. Let's make it so they can't touch us. We've already fought to keep this land. We can't afford to lose it now." Ryan was silent for a long moment, staring at her with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something deeper, more vulnerable. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping as the weight of the decision seemed to settle over him. "You're right," he said quietly. "We've been playing this game too long. We've been living in the shadows, hoping that no one would notice. But the truth is, we've been living on borrowed time." Nancy nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. This wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about their future. It was about taking control of their lives and refusing to let anyone, whether Brennan, the mining company, or anyone else, decide what happened next. "So what do we do?" Ryan asked, his voice low but determined. Nancy didn't hesitate. "We go to the sheriff. We get the proper documentation. We make it legal. And then we fight legally, publicly, with everything we have." The plan was simple, but it was also dangerous. The idea of putting everything on the line, of exposing their secret to the world, was both thrilling and terrifying. But it was the only way forward. There was no going back now. They spent the next few days preparing, gathering all the necessary documents, and evidence of their claim. Ryan reached out to the sheriff, who agreed to help them file the proper mining claim, ensuring that their ownership of the land was official and above board. But as they worked, the tension in the air grew. Nancy could feel the eyes of the town on them, the whispers growing louder as people began to wonder why the Mercer land was suddenly being legitimized. They didn't know the whole story, no one did, but they could see the change. And with that change came suspicion. Nancy's heart ached as she realized how much of their lives had been built on lies, how much they had kept hidden from the world. But there was no time for regrets. They had a future to fight for. The day they went to the sheriff's office to file the papers was a day Nancy would never forget. The sheriff, a man named Frank Wilkins, had proven to be an ally, but even he seemed to hesitate when it came time to finalize the claim. He knew the risks, knew the kind of trouble they might be bringing on themselves. "You understand what you're doing, right?" Sheriff Wilkins asked, his voice low and cautious. "Once this is filed, there's no going back. You'll be putting yourselves in the crosshairs of the mining company, of anyone who wants a piece of that silver." Ryan nodded, his jaw set, his eyes unwavering. "I understand, Sheriff, but I've been running long enough. I can't run anymore." Wilkins didn't say anything for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you're on your own from here on out." With that, they filed the paperwork. Their claim was now official. The silver was theirs legally. But even as they walked out of the sheriff's office, Nancy knew that the battle was far from over. They had just made themselves the target of every claim jumper and opportunist in the region. The sheriff's warning echoed in her mind. They were on their own now. But for the first time since arriving in Copper Ridge, Nancy felt a sense of pride. They had done something that couldn't be undone. They had taken their future into their own hands. As they made their way back to the ranch, the land stretching out before them, Nancy felt a shift within herself. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building something real, something lasting. She and Ryan had been through so much: betrayal, fear, uncertainty, but now, standing side by side, they were ready to face whatever came next. For the first time, they weren't just running from their pasts. They were facing the future together, as partners with a bond stronger than the land they had claimed. That night, as they sat together in the quiet of the ranch house, the fire crackling softly, Nancy knew that the road ahead would be hard, but it would also be theirs. Together, they could weather anything. And in that moment, Nancy realized that she had found something even more valuable than silver. She had found a home, not in a place, but in Ryan, in their partnership, in the life they were building. "We've made it this far," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan looked at her, his eyes dark with emotion. "We'll make it further," he replied. And for the first time, Nancy believed him.